Explore this area a little bit more with Viktor Katona, who is lead crude analyst at Kpler. Always good to speak to you, Victor. I always learn something, so I'm looking forward to this interview as well. Look, in terms of the Indian oil and product consumption, I mean, my basic premise has been that it's been a real bonus for them in many ways, this terrible, terrible war on the European continent, because they've been able to get discounted oil in vast quantities from Russia as well, which has put pressure on other suppliers to also cut their prices. Is my basic assumption pretty much on the mark, or am I missing something?
Correct. India right now, over the past 1.5 years, has a competitive edge that it didn't have before. Right now, you have two main Asian powerhouses, and that's India and China, that are buying discounted crude. China is also buying Iranian, of course, and Venezuelan. But ultimately, you have two main powerhouses that have cheaper crude than anyone else in the market. And because you have cheaper crude than anyone else on the market, not only is your refinery margin $15 per barrel, it's $20, $25 per barrel. So suddenly you have significantly more money, and basically you can use it for whatever purpose you want. You can use it into, fund your refinery expansion projects. You can use it for the government, to prepare for elections, or you can use it for renewables. Ultimately, the path is, yours to be taken. But ultimately, it has been a very profitable year for India, and the main reason for that is discounted Russian crude.
That's fascinating. And obviously, Russian crude is competing with OPEC crude, Russia only being part of OPEC Plus, throughout not only Southeast Asia, but of course the entire region, around the entire globe actually, that will take Russian oil, of course. A lot of Western nations won't touch it with a barge pole. But in terms of what this has done for competition, for selling barrels into Asia, what are the broader ramifications, Victor?
Well, the Indians have been very careful, very, very cautious not to antagonize the two key Middle Eastern partners that they have, and that's Iraq and Saudi Arabia. So when the Russian barrels started to flow into India, the first thing to be cut was the spot deliveries. So think of all the West African grades, think of Mexican, think of American grades, everything that was spot traded. But they don't want to antagonize Riyadh. They don't want to antagonize Baghdad. That's why you don't really see a massive downslide in imports from those countries, because they understand they need to play a political game. It's not just all economics. It's not just profits. They need to make sure that, in 2030, when if let's say there's no more Russian crude, the Middle Easterners still like them. They still prefer them as top clients that they've been working with for decades. So in this sense, I think India's energy policy has been very, very smart. They are making money, but at the same time, they don't overdo it. They always understand that there's politics in energy.
Yeah, Victor, Arabile here. In the context of being very smart with it, I mean, I'm very interested in that electricity situation for them, where by all means they're making sure that the one thing they don't have is those rolling blackouts, as you make example of, which is the case that you see in South Africa with those energy disruptions. If that was to happen, I mean, that GDP number would certainly not be where it is, then it would probably be weaker. How close are they to getting that completely right, would you say?
I mean, I might have a little bias myself, living in Europe where electricity prices have been skyrocketing, right? But I think that the Indians, again, are having a very smart electricity policy. And that is, don't pledge to phase out coal. Have your ambitious renewable policies, but rely on coal, gas, nuclear, whatever you have in the meantime, because ultimately India is still very much energy poor. Its average energy consumption per capita is 7% of an average American's energy consumption. So it's super, super tiny. They still need a tremendous amounts of electricity, tremendous amounts of power, and they use whatever source that they can have. Do they have hydro resources? Bring them on. Do we have nuclear? They're doubling their nuclear capacity within the next 5 years. They're still building massive amounts of coal plants, and their coal production is rising by double digits over the past 3 years. So they're expanding into every possible direction. And I think that's the correct energy policy. Prioritize your populace, prioritize that they have the electricity supply, that they don't need to sit in darkness. And once you're ready, and once you sort of had that step, go into the additional layers of, renewables, solar, wind, and everything else. So in this sense, I mean, there's pretty much no blackouts in India. It's a mystery how they do it, but they do it, and it's successful.
Does that mean that the dependence on elements like coal, fossil fuels primarily, then that might take a while to wean off for India? In fact, perhaps a few decades even.
Absolutely. I mean, coal production in India has been rising by 10, 11% in the past years. And the main reason is it's cheap, it's domestic, and ultimately it serves the purpose of generating electricity. And in an overall environment, when oil is relatively expensive, I mean, 85 is good enough for everyone, but still it's relatively expensive. LNG has been super expensive over the past couple of years. Coal has been a steady, reliable energy source, and they have it at home. They have tremendous amounts of coal at home. Why not use it? In the meantime, you can use it. In 2030, 40, maybe the solar build out that they intend to have, or the green hydrogen that Reliance has been investing so heavily into, will bear fruit. But right now, it's very much a coal focused story. And again, it works. It's polluting. It's damaging to the environment, but ultimately it provides India with the means to have an economy growth, a GDP growth of 8% per year, which is, one of the most stellar performances globally.
While I've got you, a bit of a cheeky one at the end on China as well. I mean, obviously you mentioned that they are getting this discounted crude, as indeed the Indians are as well. Are you seeing any signs amidst this tsunami which is surrounding the Chinese economy at the moment? Are you seeing any signs of less crude imports, refining activity, or general usage as well? Because I think it might be the case, again, that actually that's not one of the problems at the moment that appears to be showing a Chinese slowdown, or indeed is it?
We don't yet see any signs of a Chinese slowdown. However, if you look very closely into China, there's one thing that you need to notice. China is maximizing its intake of discounted crude. So whatever is discounted, whatever is cheap, Chinese refiners right now will try to buy up all of it. Indian imports into China this month, the highest ever. And the main reason is that Indian crude right now is the cheapest of all globally. Iran light into China is -10 to Brent. You don't get crudes like that anymore. It's the cheapest. So China tries to buy the cheapest crudes available, which might be perceived as a sign of weakness, right? Because you don't buy the Saudi barrels, you don't buy the Kuwaiti or Iraqi barrels, you buy the sanctioned Iranian barrels. But so far, in terms of volumes, there's no sign whatsoever of a Chinese refining slowdown, which is good for oil prices. I mean, as you have seen, we're still 85 and haven't plunged.
Victor, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it. Viktor Katona is the lead crude analyst at Kpler.